Hi, my name is Joanna Gully from History 131 and 03, American History 1, and this is my short essay assignment number 2. Chapter 9. What effect did industrialization have on the daily life of American citizens? The rise of industrialization in America greatly impacted every aspect of American lives and made luxuries available to the average citizen. According to Chapter 9 of U.S. History by OpenStax, due to the automation of the manufacturing process, now all but the very poor could afford the necessities and some of the small luxuries of life. Rooms were lit by oil lamps. Homes were heated by parlor stoves. Iron cook stoves with multiple burners made it possible for housewives to prepare more elaborate meals. Many people could afford carpets and upholstered furniture, and even farmers could decorate their homes with curtains and wallpaper. Clocks, which had once been quite expensive, were now within the reach of ordinary people. No longer did Americans have to be so self-sufficient, and goods that were previously produced by artisans and were too expensive for the average citizen to afford were more readily available. This did mean, though, that artisan goods were no longer sought after and work moved to factory settings, which was controlled and much harder than working in a home setting where working hours were at the liberty of the laborer and not a strict employer. Furthermore, factory conditions were very unsafe and the workers were very expendable. While goods were now more available to American citizens, it came at the cost of de-skilled factory labor and poor working conditions. Chapter 10. What was American political culture like in the 1820s? During the 1820s, American political culture became increasingly democratic. According to Chapter 10.1 of U.S. History by OpenStax, in the early 1820s, deference to pedigree began to wane in American society. A new type of deference, to the will of the majority and not to a ruling class, took hold. The spirit of democratic reform became most evident in the widespread belief that all white men, regardless of whether they owned property, had the right to participate in elections. Due to the universal manhood suffrage movement, all white men were eventually granted the right to vote in America. Still, women, blacks, and Indians were excluded and would continue to be for some time. The election of 1824 proved to be different than prior ones, as there was more of a popular vote. Jackson won the election by popular vote, but the presidency was given to John Adams based on electoral votes. As a result, the election was seen as corrupt by many. Chapter 11. What was the result of the Missouri Compromise? The Missouri Territory was acquired by the United States during the Louisiana Purchase, and when its inhabitants started rallying for statehood, it was questioned whether it would be a slave or free state. Many had flocked to Missouri already and had brought slaves with them, which added to the issue. There were many people on each side of the argument, and the Missouri Compromise was created by Congress as an agreement. According to Chapter 11.2 of U.S. History by OpenStax, Missouri and Maine would enter the Union at the same time, Maine as a free state, Missouri as a slave state. The balance between free and slave states was maintained in the Senate, and Southerners did not have to fear that Missouri slaveholders would be deprived of their human property. Along with this decision, the Missouri Compromise outlined that any other territories acquired from the Louisiana Purchase above Missouri would not allow slavery. The Missouri Compromise helped keep the Union united for the time being, and balance was kept in the Senate. Chapter 12. Why was cotton such an important commodity and how was it produced in America? Cotton was such an important commodity because it was essential to industry in the North and was necessary for the flourishing of the Southern economy. The production of cotton was heavily reliant on slave labor, and the cotton grown in the South was greatly sought after. According to Chapter 12.2 of U.S. History by OpenStax, a demand for it already existed in the industrial textile mills of Great Britain, and in time, a steady stream of slave-grown American cotton would also supply northern textile mills. Southern cotton, picked and processed by American slaves, helped fuel the 19th century Industrial Revolution in both the United States and Great Britain. Slave labor built the Cotton Kingdom, and the amount of work slaves did was brutal. Necessarily, the success of the Southern economy was due to their labor. Cotton grown and picked in the South was ginned, pressed into bales, and shipped down the Mississippi River to the North for industrial use. Chapter 13. What is Transcendentalism and what impact did it have on American culture in the 19th century? Transcendentalism was a movement that encouraged more progressive views and taught of thinking past societal norms and religious norms. According to Chapter 13.1 from U.S. History by OpenStax, Transcendentalists believed that all people could attain an understanding of the world that surpassed rational sensory experience. Transcendentalists were critical of mainstream American culture. They reacted against the age of mass democracy in Jacksonian America, what Tocqueville called the tyranny of majority, by arguing for greater individualism against conformity. Transcendentalism impacted American culture by encouraging Americans to think for themselves instead of just going along with the mainstream American lifestyle. Leading figures such as Emerson, Thoreau, and Whitman all contributed to spreading the word of individualism, and Americans began catching on. Transcendentalism undoubtedly contributed to social reform during the 19th century. Chapter 14. How was the Republican Party formed, and what did it stand for politically? The Republican Party was formed out of indignation towards the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which nullified the Missouri Compromise, by Northern Whigs and abolitionists. According to Chapter 14.2 of U.S. History by OpenStax, the new Republican Party pledged itself to preventing the spread of slavery into the territories and rallied against the slave power, infuriating the South. As a result, the party became a solidly Northern political organization. The Republican Party took the place of the Free Soil Party and widened the rift between the North and the South. The formation of the Republican Party definitely played a role in the South's eventual secession from the Union. Chapter 15. What was the Emancipation Proclamation, and why was it important? The Emancipation Proclamation was an official proclamation made by President Lincoln in an attempt to emancipate all American slaves from their masters. Unfortunately, the proclamation had limits, and slaves were not immediately freed. Still, the proclamation was an important step towards slave liberation. According to Chapter 15.3 from U.S. History by OpenStax, the proclamation generated quick and dramatic reactions. The news created euphoria among slaves, as it signaled the eventual end of their bondage. Predictably, Confederate leaders raged about the proclamation, reinforcing their commitment to fight to maintain slavery, the foundation of the Confederacy. While abolitionists commended Lincoln and the proclamation, there were still people in the Union in opposition for economic reasons. Slavery still played a large role in industry, and if slavery were abolished, business would be greatly impacted. By signing the Emancipation Proclamation, Lincoln showed that one of the Union's main goals for winning the war was the abolishing of slavery, which is frightening to many on both sides. Chapter 16. What was the Invisible Empire of the South, and how did it affect reform efforts during Reconstruction? The Invisible Empire of the South was the Ku Klux Klan. The Klan was dedicated to reforming the South back to its Confederacy days. According to Chapter 16.4 of U.S. History by OpenStax, the Klan used its power to eliminate black economic independence, decimate blacks' political rights, reclaim white dominance over black women's bodies and black men's masculinity, tear apart black communities, and return blacks to earlier patterns of economic and political subservience and social deference. The Klan terrorized freed African Americans mercilessly, and committed disgusting acts of violence against anything and everything that was a part of Reconstruction. The Klan and other white supremacy groups greatly set back reform efforts due to their cruelty and played a part in ending Reconstruction.